watching Vice President Kamala Harris wrapping up her first major policy speech in North Carolina. She's now working the rope line, shaking hands with folks as she laid out new details on her economic agenda. She touted the Biden administration's work bringing the economy back from the COVID pandemic.
She said she wants to build what she's calling an opportunity economy, with bringing down costs of living as her top priority as president. And that includes her proposal to ban federal price gouging on groceries, lowering the cost of insulin and prescription drugs, and taking down barriers for home ownership. We have CNN's Eva McKind in Raleigh for us. Eva was there for this speech. How's it being received, Eva?
Oh, Jess, it's being received very well by this crowd. It is a smaller crowd than her typical campaign rally, and these are invited guests from the community. But the vice president basically outlined two very different visions for America. This was the first time that we heard her give a concrete policy address, but it was also significant because you could see she was really intentional about trying to connect with everyday Americans. She says that she knows what it's like when the prices add up for clothes, for food, for groceries, for everyday living expenses. She talked about working at McDonald's as a young person in college and then seeing some of her coworkers at that time trying to make that salary work while raising a family. So here are the actual concrete policies that she laid out. A federal ban on price gouging for food. She pledged to build 3 million new affordable homes that she underscored would in fact go to the working class. And perhaps the loudest applause line came when she talked about helping first-time home buyers, $25,000 for first-time home buyers. You saw people get up on their feet and just applaud loudly. That was something that is very well received. And no doubt, Jess and Boris, that is something that I repeatedly hear on the campaign trail. So many people are worried about the ability to buy a house and the ability to afford rent. And so this economic vision is really speaking to the needs of everyday Americans. Republicans are characterizing it as just a wish list. They are, in fact, policies that would require working with Congress and are very difficult to get over the finish line. But at least now, Jess and Boris, we have a vision, a concrete policy vision for what a Harris presidency would bring.
Eva McKind live for us in Raleigh. The question now becomes, how will voters absorb this vision of the economy? Let's discuss with our panel. Amisha Cross, Matt Gorman, Jeff Zeleny, and Julia Chatterley is with us as well. Jeff, on the politics of this, there were two things that really struck out to me with this speech, and I think they were pretty obvious and deliberate. On the issue of tariffs, which Donald Trump has sort of made his namesake going back to his first run for the White House. Kamala Harris here describing it as a Trump tax on imports, essentially saying that Donald Trump wants to tax consumers. And the second thing, she's spent this speech contrasting herself with Donald Trump. And I think that the most clear contrast was the fact that yesterday Donald Trump is giving a press conference outside of his private golf club. And then you have the vice president here talking about how excited she was to see her mom save up for 10 years to buy a house, and then how she worked at McDonald's to put herself through college and watch people around her struggle to make ends meet and work multiple jobs to do that. So it gives a sense of legitimacy to this populist argument that she's trying to make.
I mean, the contrast in every respect could not have been more clear. In terms of the Trump tariff, she really broke it down. She said it's a Trump tax on gas, a Trump tax on food. So what this is doing by having her finally give a policy speech, it's shining a broader light on his policies, and there are gaps in both of them, no doubt about it. One thing she did not say is how any of this would be paid for. Of course, that is not uncommon in a presidential campaign. This is an aspirational level. He never says how he would pay for his plans either. But what I did think, and this is the point of it obviously, is to draw a contrast obviously with him, but on the middle class, and help explain herself. She still is not introduced that well to the American people. She's been in the public eye, she's been vice president, but allowing her to sprinkle in her biography I thought was so interesting, and we are going to hear more of that at the convention next week. The housing crisis. I hear it constantly as I travel around the country talking to voters. You may ask, why didn't the Biden administration do more on this? It's a a good thing to ask. They've done some, but she's focusing on that with a specific of $25,000. That would be certainly not paid for, but that is something that voters can get their minds around. So I think drawing a sharp contrast here is exactly what she wants to be doing. The details, they don't quite all add up, but again, we don't know the makeup of Congress, and they don't add up for either side. I mean, a campaign is about sort of laying out your vision, and she's starting to do that.
Yeah, it's about laying out these kind of lofty goals, and then you got to see where Congress lands and if you can actually get what parts of that you might be able to get done. Amisha, Jeff makes such a great point, which was there was so much personalization woven into what is an economic policy speech. And it struck me is when she would talk about, when she was talking about the feelings that she had when they moved into their first house, and what it feels like to be an American right now that's struggling. She's trying to make that connection with voters, that she sees them, that she hears them. It's a tale as old as time in politics, but not everybody can do it.
Exactly. Well, you can't do it if you didn't live it. So I think that the narrative she's able to build is one that comes from personal experience. And honestly, it's one that millions of families across America have in that same way, where they've watched their parents, they've watched their grandparents, caregivers have to save for years. Some of them make it to where they're able to buy a home. Many of them, quite frankly, do not. And I think that her having that conversation, showcasing how she also had to work in college, working a low-wage job, setting up that dichotomy that many people still don't understand. The majority of folks in low-wage jobs have families at home. These are not teenagers who are trying to, save some extra cash. These are folks who are paying rent, who have to buy school supplies, who have to ensure that everything is taken care of at home, utilities and all of that, off of the cost of what you're going to earn flipping burgers. That is a very tough thing to do in this society. But I think that what she also did in outlining the policy platform she did was pay attention to what Americans are seriously concerned about. We know housing is one of those. We know that being able to afford simple cost of living is one of those. We also know that it matters to have someone who has lived that, who has watched their family live it, have that conversation. Because at that point, it shows not only a heart, but it also shows that you understand what that means in everyday life. Back to school is just a minute around the corner. For some people, it's already started. They already know what that cost is.
Matt, we had to interrupt you before you were.
I know, and I wanted to hear your answer.
Oh, it was so intelligent. I already forgot.
Well, yeah, it was a great response that unfortunately we had to cut away from. But now that you've heard the speech, what stands out to you as the most clear and effective line of attack that we're likely going to hear from Republicans as a response?
Two things. I think number one, she took a lot of far left positions during her first run in 2019 and 2020. She has, temporarily kind of moderated these through some anonymous quotes from aides saying, well, she doesn't really want to ban fracking anymore. She doesn't want to do this, doesn't want to do that. This new program that she's kind of doing is pretty far left, $25,000, price controls essentially. That's number one. But the other thing is, kind of conveniently forgot she was vice president for the last 4 years when a lot of the housing market crisis was at its worst, when inflation was at its worst. So there's a lot of memory holding that. But look, when it comes to the $25K, I mean, you just added $25,000 into every price onto every home price in the country. Because if you're giving that away essentially for free, people will add it into the price. And obviously, price controls have come under criticism from the Washington Post, Catherine Rampell, whom this channel's talked to earlier. So you're going to see a lot of that in the messaging over the next couple of days, if not weeks, as we go into the convention.
And Julia Chatterley is with us as well, monitoring all of the economic pieces of these economic policies, how they would actually work. And Julia, I think people are watching this and absorbing this and wondering to themselves, okay, maybe that sounds interesting. Would it actually work? Will these things actually do what Vice President Harris wants them to do?
I think this was a masterclass in sticking to the script, keeping things very voter friendly, keeping the details incredibly light, and not talking about how you have to pay for it all. If Donald Trump is sort of Harry Potter in terms of the magician for his policies, this was a bit Hermione Granger. It wasn't even just about not paying for it. She said she was going to reduce the deficit despite all these giveaways as well. And I understand that's politics at this moment, but I think your point is so accurate when she was talking about all of the things that are impacting people, whether it's high prices, and we know prices have soared over this administration, unaffordability crisis in housing. I mean, house prices, the median house price is up 20% over the past 3 years. So she did a great job, I think, of changing the narrative, which is reflected so poorly on President Biden to try and make it more optimistic about what she's going to do. Just to give you a snapshot of some of the things that she said in the price gouging comments, I just don't know how that federal ban is going to work. If they're talking about directly targeting prices, it will require some form of act of Congress. Isolating how and where price gouging is taking place is very difficult. She talked about the profits of grocery stores. Their margins are incredibly thin. For every dollar sale, they make profits of around 1 to 3 cents. Just try proving that their price gouging is going to be incredibly difficult beyond anything else. On housing, she said at the end of her first term, she hopes to have those 3 million houses built. But in order to do that, a lot of these home builders, and they are saying that they'll provide incentives, they're going to have to borrow money. And we know interest rates are really high. So a lot of that's going to depend on mortgage rates coming down, which could end up fueling house prices even higher if people start buying. But also home builders are going to want to be able to borrow at lower rates as well. I mean, I can pick out a whole host of other things where the devil's going to be in the detail and it's all going to be about the execution. But I will say very quickly, I like the way that she compared and contrasted with Trump over what his impact will be. And I have to say it's inflationary in many of these cases.